Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on mindful self-compassion. Thank you for joining us. I know how difficult it can be to carve out time in the day to listen and attend a webinar like this. So I've also recorded this webinar in case you couldn't attend at the time that we allocated. I'd like to open today by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land which we meet today. There will be various ones depending on where you are listening from, but for me here it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin today. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comments box and we'll try to address them as we go. It'd be great to have a bit of a chat. If there is anything more personal that you would like to ask and not post, please feel free to email me at info@compassionatenature.com. And if you would like more information on mindful self-compassion, I really encourage you to check out the Centre for Mindful Self-Compassion, www.centreformsc.org. And if anything comes up today that's difficult for you, I really encourage you to talk to someone who you trust. And if they're not available, please do call Lifeline. If you're in Australia, that's 131114. So perhaps before we begin, I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and why I've started this business in caregiving and self-care resources for caregivers. I am a clinical psychologist and I work primarily in public community mental health settings. And so we see a range of people who are really, really struggling in life. And therapy and being present really requires one to be sensitive and attuned to the suffering of what these individuals are experiencing so that you can have an appropriate response. And so in that, over the years, I realized just how essential it was to look after myself. And self-care has truly been my very, very best support, my best friend and encourager when I needed it. And because of this, I felt just how important it was to share those self-care resources with my colleagues as well. I also volunteer in the space of climate change and social advocacy. So I work with an organisation called Psychology for a Safe Climate, and we really provide workshops and resources for people who are in the field or volunteering in the field of the environment, climate change and social justice, and really trying to support them in the emotional burden of engaging with larger, bigger than self problems in the world and really being able to sustain that work. And more recently, I became a mum. So I feel like I'm surrounded by caregivers, and there's just so much goodness happening and so many people doing so many good things out there in the world, which I think is really wonderful to connect with, especially given, this day and age. If we watch anything on TV or flipping through our Facebook feeds or Twitter, we're really constantly bombarded with the problems of the world. So it's really comforting to work with and to notice just how much caregiving there and love there is with people around us. What I do notice a lot is that there is a high rate of burnout and compassion fatigue. And so it really pains me to see people who are traditionally very passionate and driven to do good in this world become disheartened, disenfranchised and burnt out and disconnected from what they really love doing. So this really provided the impetus for me to start my own business, which I will be focusing on trying to disseminate really effective, evidence-based psychological resources around self-care. So Let me tell you a little bit about some of the challenges I've observed in caregiving. And let's face it, I guess fundamentally we are all in some phase of our lives a caregiver, whether that be as a parent, as a teacher, looking after aging parents, looking after siblings or family members with disabilities, to caring for our non-human world, animals, the environment, and the world around us. So the caregiving role is quite broad, but what it does require and what does cause some difficulties if left not tended to is it requires us to really be attuned to and sensitive to the suffering and pain that we're seeing in the world, because in order to respond as a caregiver, you need to first see that there's a need. You need to see that there is some level of pain or suffering. And so this is a big challenge because it activates our empathy and our own pain receptors. There's something called mirror neurons. So if anyone comes to you and expresses the pain that they're going through, if you're connected and attuned to that, it will literally fire up a part of your brain that also feels those emotions. And so we need a mechanism to be able to process and be with our own emotional reactions, in order for them not to disturb or inhibit an appropriate response. A second challenge that I've observed in being surrounded by caregivers and being a caregiver myself is that we need to find a way to respond that's effective. And so not only do we need to notice the pain and not minimize it and not over dramatize it, but we need to connect with, well, what is needed in this moment? What does this person need? Do they need something, comforting words, or do they need something more practical? And in the space of giving what's needed or responding and trying to be attuned to that, we also have to sit with the possibility that that might not make any difference, that we might still be left with sitting and just being with the pain that the person is experiencing. So I think as a caregiver, another challenge is just being able to sit with and find space for that sense of, if we feel like we've failed or our response has been inadequate in some way, a mechanism to meet that failure without feeling like failures, because that has the potential for then us to again disconnect and turn away from the work that we're doing. And the third really common challenge that I've certainly experienced and observed is this overemphasis on the other or the cause and underemphasis on our own self-care. And even when we connect with the intuition, real knowing that of course we need to look after ourselves, sometimes when we do, it's paired with feelings of guilt or inadequacy or discomfort, because we're just not used to caring for ourselves in the same way that we care for others. So there are many, many other challenges and rewards associated with caregiving, and I'd really love to hear any comments that you have or your experiences of what you find rewarding and challenging, and please do share them on our Facebook page. We do have a Facebook support group page for caregivers where we can share resources and ask for ideas. And I'll post that in this on the Compassionate Nature Facebook business page for you. So self-care involves a lot of things. There's a lot of different self-care strategies out there, but fundamentally, in my opinion, what I've noticed is that they all share this common thread, and they all require a level of what we call self-compassion. So if we think about what compassion is, firstly, it then might be easier to understand what self-compassion is. So as a caregiver, when a friend or loved one or client comes to you with a problem, it could be just something really everyday, like forgetting to go to a meeting, to stuffing up when having a presentation, to putting the sugar instead of another ingredient in a cake. You know, that there are so many different ways that we feel like we stuff up in life, and we feel inadequate, like we've failed in some way, that we're bad in some way. And if your friend came to you with those things, you would immediately be attuned to their experience. You're like, oh my gosh, honey, I'm so sorry you're feeling this way. It totally makes sense that you did this or that, based on these circumstances or based on what was going on. So we acknowledge that they're in pain, and we pair that with a statement that says, you know, that validates how they're feeling. And it says, you know, other people, you know, stuff up too. Other people feel miserable and like they've failed, and they're frustrated. Other people feel this way too. So it brings in this sense of common humanity, that they're not alone in their suffering, that this is part of being human. It's part of the human condition. It's not about them being strange or odd or weird. It is part of the human condition. It's okay. And then thirdly, a compassionate response is a very active response. It's not just about connecting with the pain and validating the pain, but it's about doing something about it, saying, what can I do to help? And that could range from just giving them a hug, to making them dinner, to taking them somewhere, to doing something more practical, offering some kind of guidance. So compassion is a very active response to pain and suffering. And so when we think of self-compassion, it's exactly those three elements, but turned inwards. As Kristen Neff and other mindful self-compassion teachers out there, like Tara Brach, they say self-compassion is really about learning to be your own best friend. It's giving yourself the same level of kindness and care when things get difficult as you would someone who you care and love about. So it sounds like a fairly simple concept when we think about it with those three key elements, but it requires practice. You know, it's a bit like if we have high cholesterol, if we only take one cholesterol tablet, that's not going to reduce our cholesterol. We need to take them every day, and it has a cumulative effect on us, and eventually over time our cholesterol reduces. And it's the same with addressing the part of ourselves that can be really highly critical of ourselves, that can really beat ourselves up when things go wrong, that can really criticize how we look, how we act, that we're not good enough. These are very common human experiences, and it takes conscious, repeated, deliberate effort to meet those experiences with a different approach of self-compassion. And there's a lot of research out there that demonstrates the benefits of self-compassion. If we do apply this response to ourselves, we are more able to help others. We are more motivated to do things that are challenging. We find the courage to speak up, the courage to act, and we also are more open to failing and being imperfect and learning through those failures. So if you'd like to learn more about mindful self-compassion, I really encourage you to go to the Centre for MSC, their website, and there's a lot of videos on that website and also key practices that you can try out and just play with, and just expose yourself to a few different ideas and the ways that self-compassion can be developed. There's an 8-week course which is called Mindful Self-Compassion that was developed by Kristen Neff, who is a pioneering researcher in self-compassion, and Christopher Germer, who is a clinician, a clinical psychologist. And they've developed an 8-week program in order to help cultivate and really delve deeply into this experience of self-compassion. And the 8 weeks may seem like a big commitment and a long time, but rather than brushing over and just having a quick, 2-hour or half an hour seminar on mindful self-compassion, they acknowledge that this is a skill that that needs time, and it needs rehearsal, and it needs to evolve. And it's best to do that when you've got someone who can guide the process, and that when you're in a group environment where you can hear and learn vicariously from other people's experiences. And if given time, to really cultivate this skill, it sticks with you. So this is a course that keeps giving after the 8 weeks is finished. So one of the ways to remember a mindful self-compassion response that I really love is through using the body. And this is one of the optional exercises in the 8-week program. But I find it's a really helpful metaphor just to begin to really consolidate what self-compassion is, and through using the body, because we know that our body communicates to the mind. So when we're all tense and closed up, that communicates to the mind that there's something to feel threatened of. Whereas when we open up, we kind of are telling our emotional system that it's safe and we're okay and to be grounded. So it's using our body to almost begin to regulate those difficult emotions when we're feeling them, so that we can then respond from a very wise place rather than a reactive place. So it goes something like this. So tensing up your fists and squeezing them really, really, really tight. And this is what it feels like to resist and to be fighting your experience. It's stressful, it's tense, it's tight, and it's very close to what's happening around. It's very focused in. And this is what self-criticism is like, fighting our experience. If we open our palms like this is, you might immediately feel a sense of relief. I certainly did in that moment. And I actually took a breath. So immediately I can begin to open my attention to things other than what was happening inside. So I'm still very aware of what's happening in my mind, but I'm noticing the environment, my backyard, the tree behind me, and my hands feel a lot more relaxed. So this is really a metaphor for mindfulness, for receptive presence, for just being receptive to the experience that's happening right now, without minimizing it, without pushing it away, without dramatizing it, just being with it as it is. Then if I reach my arms out, which you can't see, but I invite you to do, that is the metaphor for connection, for common humanity, for realizing that how I'm feeling is shared by everyone around the world who is human. And then if I put one hand over the other and onto my heart, this is bringing in, there's a sense of warmth, of care, of kindness and appreciation, a sense of love. And this is the metaphor for self-compassion. So I hope those body signals have encouraged you to just play with the different ways of being with our experience and give you a better sense of what a self-compassionate response might be, and inspired you to learn more about what self-compassion is and what the mindful self-compassion 8-week program is. And I'm really delighted to say one of my first business activities is to offer the 8-week mindful self-compassion course. I was teacher trained by Kristen and Chris Germer in New York some time ago, and I'm just so excited to be beginning this journey again after being on maternity leave with my 2 babies for so long. And if you have any questions about the course or upcoming workshops that I might be holding, and any feedback about this webinar, please do be in touch with me. I trialled today hosting this webinar under the tree in my backyard because I just thought it would be so nice to have some natural light. But I'd love your feedback to see if this setting worked for this webinar. And any comments around your experience as a caregiver and self-care, I'd love to hear from you. So thank you once again for taking the time and joining me today. It's been a real privilege to be able to share these beautiful resources with you, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Bye.